Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where in the world you are. I'm Lisa Berkeley, and this is Reaction to Response. Reaction to Response was built out of the desire to help us shift from fear-based reactions to the state of the world to love and care-based solutions and responses. We were birthed through the the Charter for Compassion's Women and Girls sector. And as part of the charter, we are in over 400 cities with 1,800 partners in 53 countries around the world. You can learn more about us at thecharterforcompassion.org. Before we get into today's topic, or actually we will get into today's topic in just a minute, I want to go over a bit of housekeeping. First, this call is being recorded. Second, if you have any tech issues or any challenges with your technology, you can go to zoom.us. You can also, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat section, as well as, if you hover over the bottom, a Q&A pop-up, and you can put any questions or comments for our guest today or for us with behind the scenes in those places, and we'll try to help you as soon as possible. We'd also like to take a minute and thank people working behind the scenes: Sandy Hart, Brianna Lathorpe, Susan DeGaia, and Betsy Spano. So thank you, everyone. Today's guest is Mark Silver, and we're going to be speaking about protecting yourself from a predatory economy, and more specifically, both loving money and the love in money. And as you all know, another thing that we like to do in Women and Girls sector is we like to advocate for the UN Sustainability Goals, which you see on your screen here. Again, before we get into that, I do want to mention that after we're done with our conversation with Mark, we will be switching to the after party, the information of which is on your screen. Excuse me. And also there's information for you in the chat section. Okay, so Mark, good morning, and thank you for being with us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. Really honored.
So I'd like to actually, though, before we get in, and I know that we are on right now looking more at the sustainability goals. I'm going to stay here just for a second, because when we talk about building a better future for the world, which is the purpose of the sustainability goals, we also have to begin with where we are today. And given here in the US, we just had a very violent act and show not only of white supremacism and tremendous hatred, but we have had a president who is not coming out very strongly to condemn this. And so I would just like to take a minute, because the purpose of these calls is to help us shift from fear-based reactions to care-based responses, that we just take a minute and take a deep breath and really kind of get centered in our hearts and in care. And we're going to get into actually this part of our conversation later on, but I would just like us to sort of, allow ourselves to be guided by wisdom. So, were you going to say something, Mark?
No, just breathing, praying.
Yeah.
Allah.
And may we all stay safe. May our hearts be open. May we release hatred and fear and develop a greater sense of compassion to do the right thing that reflects care for all humans and our planet.
Mm-hmm. And may we have the courage to face the discomfort in ourselves, to undo what has been done to us, and to have the strength and courage to face the discomfort of undoing the systems that support all of this and have supported all of this pain and destruction for so long.
Amen. Oh, goodness. Okay, and with that, let's get into discussing our sustainability goals. I forgot to mention also, by the way, who Mark is. You can also go to the charterforcompassion.org to learn a little bit more about him, or to his business, which is heartofbusiness.com, right? Yeah, okay. Anyway, so In our pre-conversation, in preparation for today's call, Mark and I were having a conversation about the sustainability goals and how, in fact, they're actually quite unsustainable. And in particular, Mark pointed out sustainability goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. Mark, shall we just jump right into it?
Yeah, well, I mean, all of these goals, almost all of these goals are so beautiful. And even number 8, decent work, honest work, work that contributes, work that opens people and that helps and that, you know, I mean, that's wonderful. The problem is that capitalism is based upon a system of constant growth, continual growth, and that not growing, even maintaining, is, or any side of contraction is seen as unhealthy when that's not true. It's just not true. And so if you're after continual growth, the definition of that, as others have pointed out before me, is cancer. Cancer is a kind of growth that continually grows without any limits or restrictions or pullback, contraction. And um, and so I just think we need to have a real awareness and bring wisdom to that particular piece, because I believe I understand the intention beneath that is that there are elements, there are peoples who have not benefited because wealth has been stolen and moved from some areas of the globe and some populations and some communities to other communities, and we're wanting those people who have been stolen from, who have not had access, um, uh, to have access and to have growth within their particular communities, of having the feeling the wealth coming back in and the sense of abundance and support coming back in. But without that nuance and caveat, um, uh, we can become blindsided, blind to this idea of economic growth, which is the holy grail in capitalism, and it's probably its deepest flaw.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So just so you know, I've switched the screens now so everybody can see us a little bit better and hear, so that I realized too, we have some people who are lip reading. So I figure we should be more face to face. Anyway,
Hmm.
those are really important points about the foundation for how we're building and from the perspective from which we're coming. And one of the things that you and I also spoke about in preparation for this call, and talking about what is a predatory economy, which is a term that's been coined by Natalie Pace. As you and I dug into it, we also spoke about the underlying principles of a predatory economy and how they can be linked to the imbalance of predatory relations between the masculine and feminine energies. And
Hmm.
because this is women and girls sector, we really do like to get into that.
Yeah. Well, we have to. I mean, we have to include these pieces because there's so much is linked um, to capitalism, right? I mean, and the predatory, dysfunctional economy that we're in. I mean, it's it's a good reason. It's not a good reason. It's a good deal of the reason that patriarchy exists. That racism is based in the roots uh, of chattel slavery are based in the predatory economy, and both of those things, the sexism and racism, are prime examples of what the predatory economy does. And one of the things that I was really stunned, and I'm a I'm a Sufi teacher. In my lineage is named that by my sheikh who passed a couple years ago, who's from Jerusalem, uh, and and one of the things that I was really interesting to me in learning about spiritual male and female dynamics is one, of course, that the oneness is beyond
Mm-hmm.
dynamics, right? And I do not mean this in any kind of like, I see no gender, I see no color, that kind of BS that isn't true. Um, but that the essential reality, who we are beyond this world, comes from an essence that isn't primarily male or female, but comprises both. And when we talk about, like, surrender is such a key part of being healthy as a human being. Humility and surrender and service, so deeply needed. And it's been deeply misinterpreted in the service of sexism and to the detriment of women and to men. Women have taken the brunt of it in talking about this kind of a dynamic. But men are deeply affected and traumatized by sexism as well in different ways. And the what has been retained has been this notion of female surrender, decontextualized in a way that is just wrong. Surrender comes. What surrender really is from a spiritual perspective is an entering into unity. It's not a capitulation. It's not a collapse. When we surrender spiritually, when people do spiritual work around surrender, it's not to become a doormat. It's not to become enslaved to another human being and their ego. It's about letting go of certain attachments in this world so that we can become part of a greater whole. And when we talk about feminine surrender, and I want to make a difference between female, like a woman or a man or other people of other gender expressions, because gender is a non-binary spectrum. I want to say that when the feminine aspect is going to enter into that connection with the divine and the masculine and feminine principles within an individual or between two individuals, whatever their gender expression, externally or internally, when those two connect, the feminine does surrender. But in order to surrender, the masculine has to surrender, and the masculine surrender is witnessing deeply the feminine without judgment, with complete acceptance. And when there is a deep witnessing, which is a receiving, then what happens is that they surrender these principles, these masculine and feminine essences, energies surrender into each other and become a oneness. And people who are attached to patriarchal power structures don't really talk about the role of masculine surrender in this and how important that is, and how it's actually the first step, and it must happen before the feminine surrenders when we're talking. So when we're talking about being in a time-limited reality, I don't mean to get too weird or esoteric about it, but it's like there's a, in practical terms, you think about two people together in a relationship. It could be an intimate relationship. It could be a work business relationship. Someone has to see the other one in order for trust to happen. We have to fully be seen and accepted and received and understood. And it's wonderful if both people are open and it happens simultaneously. Usually what happens, because we're human, one person does that first and the other person feels the opening and is able to return the favor, and there's a greater sense of connection and community and love that comes up.
I'm just sitting with that then, and then thinking about how that translates into, first, you're referring to the individual qualities and a couple of individual people, and then when we take it into the broader context and look at the world that we've built and how we've gotten so out of balance, where did surrender become a bad thing, and why is it only women who are supposed to surrender? And when you surrender in war, that means you're the enemy. I mean, you've been conquered. There's this whole control and force dynamic rather than empowered and fully in power. There's a misunderstanding to that, and
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. You're good. Continue, please continue.
Well, I mean, all I was going to say was that there are divine principles that when a human being tries to take it on from an egoic perspective, ends up having an opposite effect. So that we are conquered by love, and it turns us upside down, annihilates our sense of who we are as a little being, and expands us in a tremendous way. Anyone who has been overcome by love knows the expansive feeling, but also the annihilation. The Sufis use the word annihilation. They don't, they don't walk on eggshells around this stuff. Surrender, annihilation, destruction. It's like there's a new reality that comes in. Um, and when we surrender to love, when we surrender to something larger to ourselves, universal source, the oneness, then we become part of that oneness. When we surrender to another human being, we are crushed and we become smaller, and that is tyranny, not freedom. And um, and so it is whenever a human being tries to enact from a place of will, or tries to replicate from a place of will a divine or spiritual principle, the effect is inevitably something that's completely opposite from what was intended, from a perspective of love.
Mhm. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, wow, there's a number of ways we can go now in this conversation. But there is something that I do want to touch on, which again, you and I spoke about earlier too, which is about not just surrender and collapse, but also in seeing, and how to shift from a place of pain to trauma. And again, if you look at our economy, so this touches on both our economy, right? Because we're in a predatory economy, um, and and not just in an economy, but in a whole socioeconomic system or structure or domination system, as Riane Eisler would refer to it, where we're harming so many people, whether it's based on color, gender, sexual preference, anything other than white male generally. How they work together, and how do we wake up to shift it? And you shared some really wonderful insights about seeing what is and getting grounded in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that if anyone has a reaction to money, to the current economy, let me say it this way, a lot of uh, common, popular, I should say, thinking about quote unquote abundance, generally in white people circles. I haven't seen it as much in people of color circles, but there's a I'm not always privy to those conversations either. But what I want to say is that there's this sense of, oh, if you don't love money, it's just an energy, it's neutral, you just have to get over it. It's all personalized. And this is what capitalism and Western society wants to do, is personalize and bring it all down to the individual. And what I want to see is that any person of heart is going to recognize the truth of the pain and dysfunction and trauma inherent in the current economy. And that if you don't have a positive relationship with money, it's not your fault. It's because you're sensing something true. You're sensing something broken.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to trust your heart. I'm sorry, you were
No,
saying.
no. I was just going to say that's powerful. Continue.
Yeah. Because I first of all want people to learn to trust their heart and not to mistrust their heart. We get all of this information and we know something's off. And so that's the first step. And the first step is witnessing what is and being with what is. One of the most important capacities for a human being to develop is the capacity to be with something that's uncomfortable without turning away from it and rejecting it. Because oftentimes what we try to do is we reject the uncomfortable, just trying to get back to a place of comfort. And I'm not talking about being in an physically unsafe situation and just going, oh, I'm going to get comfortable with this. That's not what I'm talking about. If you're unsafe physically, get the heck out of there, right? But what I am saying is that a lot of times uncomfortable emotions come up. And when we instinctively turn away and throw it all away, then we lose our sense of being able to respond with any wisdom, with any resourcefulness. And so if we can develop the capacity to be with discomfort, emotional discomfort, spiritual discomfort, and even physical discomfort that isn't unsafe, what we do is we begin to give ourselves the chance to find something that we didn't see before. So, for instance, we can notice that I was having this conversation with someone recently, is that someone who had always had this very negative reaction to money, like most of us have and should have, and had equated that to like being rich is evil, and um, and what they were able to see when they were able to kind of stop their reactionary piece is that, there are people that have access to financial resources, aka rich or wealthy, who are doing their best to wake up, to grow up, to use their money for good. And if they are comfortable, or if they, it's like there's a and I am not equating rich with good. Like, this is an important thing, that it's not inherently good to be rich. It's not inherently good to be poor. How we are with it is what's important. And so what they were able to do is start to open their hearts to the fact, like, not that they were on the path to becoming billionaires and exploiting people at a level that is harmful, but it's like, it's okay if I have a savings account. It's okay if I save for retirement. It's okay if I start to take care of the wealth that's given to me and steward it in a way that cares for myself. I don't have to instantly try to get rid of extra money because it's somehow evil, or it will turn me into somebody that isn't healthy. And it's this kind of resourcefulness that can help people make healthier choices as they walk through their economic life, as they walk through, and you can begin to see that, maybe something here is worthwhile. Maybe it's not all to be thrown out.
Mhm. For sure. So as you're talking, I mean, I'm reminded, first how we got in this part of the conversation, as far as, shifting from or first being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and how when we begin to really see the systems for what they are, and the economics for what they are, and money for what it is, that we live in a world where, at least in the Western world, as soon as you feel a little bit of discomfort, here, take a pill. And we're not actually given the tools to sit and be comfortable with discomfort, which also often causes us to act out of fear and hate and anger, keeping the sick cycle going. um, and one of the things, so I want to also, I should be a little bit transparent here. So I've known Mark for a number of years, and I've taken some classes with him, and I've also worked with him one-on-one on projects. And so I bring, he's here because he's been doing both. I've experienced incredible work with his coaching, and also I've seen his capacity to help hundreds, thousands of people change their relationship to money and to the economy, so that they can build a business that's really heart-centered and care-based. And so I just want to be transparent about what our relationship is. So, because I want to mention that one of the greatest things that I've learned from you is the capacity to discern between a business problem and a spiritual problem. And even though you speak about this in the context of building a business, it can be relevant to pretty much any transactional issue versus a spiritual or heart issue. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. Um, it's kind of I mean, it's a deep topic, and I don't want to try to do too. Anyway, I want to get my teeth into it without sending us on a 2-hour long class on the topic.
Well,
But
so Yeah.
But the bottom line of this is that when we encounter problems and things that we're trying to solve or trying to fix, like, building a business, or, creating a garden, or, building a house, or, any kind of project that we're trying to do where we're trying to accomplish something in the world, the physical world, there are inevitably things that aren't going to work. And we can approach that from a place of curiosity and openness,
Mhm.
or we can make up a story about it. And usually, what happens in our culture, because there's so much shame floating around and so much that's been done to undermine people's positive sense of themselves, a sense of themselves as resource, sense of themselves as wise, and sense of themselves as accessing love and strength and power and a lot of other divine qualities, is that it's like, oh, my business isn't working yet, I'm a bad person, or something's deeply broken with me, or I somehow have to work on my abundance issues.
Mhm.
And what I've seen is that a lot of times there are perhaps spiritual issues, like the example I was giving earlier. This person I was talking to was making poor financial decisions because of spiritual issues within them about their belief system and how their heart was relating to it. But another aspect of this is maybe you just don't know how to invest, or maybe you just haven't learned what marketing really looks like, or what a healthy sales conversation with integrity looks like. And what I've noticed is that someone will come to me going, I have abundance issues, I can't make my business work. And I'll say, well, do you know how to enroll? Do you know how to have a conversation with someone who's interested, um, with integrity, without, betraying your values, but still showing up and, maybe you having them as a client? And they're like, actually, I don't. And then they learn and they become effective, and they say, I do have abundance issues, but they're much smaller than I thought they were. I just needed to know how to do this thing. And then it becomes possible to kind of separate out, like, what is a physical problem of, like, how do I build a bridge? How do I plant? Hey, how do I care for hazelnut trees? How do I build a business? Um, you know, that you can come from a place of open-hearted curiosity, going, huh, this is curious. I thought I knew how to do it, and now I need to learn more. Versus, oh, I'm kind of all wound up with all of this emotional stuff and all of this spiritual stuff, and I feel tangled, and then that's kind of an inside job where you're wanting to work with spiritual issues, spiritual healing, emotional support and healing, to unwind that within yourself and not conflate the two, because so much confusion and pain arises out of tangling those two together.
Mhm. Yeah, so I jumped there. I realized I didn't give a fair segue from one to the other, and but now I'm kind of circling back because my reason for going there was this place of discernment that is so needed. And when we look at our economy, when we look at our pretty much everything in the world, um, how do we choose to shift? How can we shift from love? To not from love to love, from all of this. Well, we could shift.
Easy to shift from love.
Right. Right. And actually, we can shift from love, from being in the state of love to acting in the state of love, which, so there, I just sort of saved my focus. Anyway, uh, anyway, to, there's all this chaos and pain everywhere, right? So how do we do it, and to discern what is the emotional mental state and what's the real world's practical application for shifting, you know
Yeah.
um uh, uh,
You know, discernment is something that takes practice.
mhm,
Um, it just takes practice. It's really can be really challenging if you're not used to it, to be able to pull apart the feeling inside yourself between, like, is that my ego talking? Is that fear? Is that my heart? Is that a deep place in my heart or a more shallow place in my heart? Like there's so much discernment. When I did the initial training and learning with my Sufi teachers, there was a 3-year training, like immersion training with them around that. A lot of it was really just about how do you come to know your heart and discern the different voices in your heart, and um, know how to trust yourself and how to trust the divine, um, and where to question appropriately, because it gets so tricky. It can get so tricky. And so approaching this, not to say that everyone has to go through a 3-year immersive training program. I was learning about spiritual healing and went on to do even more training in my master's of divinity and yada yada, and you don't have to do that to learn this. um, but you have to be willing to say, this is an important thing to learn,
Mhm.
and to spend time. This is one of the reasons that spiritual practice is so important, whether it's a practice like meditation or prayer or something like what we teach in the remembrance. um, there needs to be time where you spend just being with yourself and being with the swirl inside and like coming to know it,
Mhm.
because it can be so chaotic sometimes. We can spend so much time involved in the outside world trying to avoid that swirl, trying to spend time with that swirl. And what people realize when they do take time is that that swirl is not mortal. It's not deadly. It doesn't kill us, unless it's ignored, and then it creates all kinds of stress related illnesses. But if I'm sad, for instance, like I'm devastated and grief stricken, not just by what's happening currently in the United States and in the world, but by the fact that this is hundreds of years old and it's been going on and on and on and on and on and on, and it continues. And that grief, when I'm in touch with it, is devastating.
Yeah.
And when I feel it, or even if I feel something that's smaller, like I yell at my kid, or there's something dynamic going on with my parenting that I'm not entirely happy with, or this week is a very busy week for me and I'm just feeling like, oh my God, I've got a lot of things to cover, and I'm feeling that kind of like daily kind of feeling. Like it can be at many different levels, that discomfort. And just to be with that, like, what is it like for me to just be with that discomfort? What if it's okay to just sit with it and notice it in my body and let it in? Like, don't tense my body trying to push it away, or trying to tense my body so that I can't. Because when you tense yourself, your sense of feeling becomes less fine,
Mhm.
and you can't feel things as much. When you loosen your hands, relax your hands, your sense of touch becomes more precise. Um, when you relax and breathe, you can smell more, you can hear more. It's the same internally. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm feeling that sense of a stirred upness and overwhelm, and wow, look, it's not killing me. I'm just feeling it. I'm feeling the tension in my shoulder. I'm feeling it. A lot of it just resolves just by taking time with it. And some of it won't resolve. And it resolves quickly in me in this moment because I've had a lot of practice doing this. Sometimes it can take minutes or it can take an hour, but it's like taking that time. And then suddenly the advantage to this is not only do you feel better and you have access to your heart in a different way, but then you can make choices. And I can see, you know what? I had this list of 10 things I wanted to get done today. They're clearly not all going to get done. Well, that's a reality. They're not all going to get done. Well, I feel kind of sad. I'd like them to get done. And then I realized, you know what? It's not going to be a tragedy. I can push 6 of these off until next week, and I can push 2 of these off till tomorrow, and I can focus on these 2 things for today. Whew. And
Yeah.
suddenly the world feels larger. It's like there's this remembering. We call this the remembrance because we're remembering that the world is larger, that love is larger, the divine is larger. What we have, the reality we have access to is larger. than whatever it is that we're experiencing in the moment.
I'm just sitting with that. And as you were speaking, I went into my own grief and for a moment got a bit emotional. A few tears came. But also in experiencing that, there is, to your point, a deep relaxation that one can experience because that physiological tightness that is so rooted in fear of pain, fear of death, fear of feeling helpless, just so strongly is part of every day, right? We're even being bombarded with it everywhere that we shouldn't feel these things. We shouldn't experience them things. Pain is bad. Anything is evil, that's not happy. And so the repression of that kind of shows up on the collective through all of the violence of towards anyone that's of a person of color or different gender choices or gender fluid, I should say. Um, I'm just sort of sitting with this and being okay, if you will, not being okay with what's happening around, but being okay in my own skin, in my own body, so that okay, what does it
Right.
look like now? And even when I think about the problems that we face as a society, um, they feel different in how and the place from which I would look for solutions also feels like, oh, there's room for creativity. Um, and I'm intrigued back going to what you started something in. Can I get a sentence out? Good morning. I was so deep in stillness. To the place when you were talking about gender and masculine and feminine energies, I should say, and that above the masculine and feminine, there is this divine source, and how, in a place of letting go and being curious and filled with wonder, we can actually better connect to that and receive wisdom. Um, so this is one of the things that I think I've learned from working with you as well is how to do exactly what you said, just this list, right?
Mm.
Um, I'll ask you like this: What do you, what is most on your heart right now around this topic of the individual to society, in our economy, around money, around power?
Yeah. So I have a few different things on my heart, and one has to do with real inspiration by so much good that's being done. There's so much good that's being done. There's so many people that are waking up, that are engaging, that are, there's all kinds of things that are happening to help to decentralize and connect with and support our hearts and a healthier economy. And I'm so, so grateful to see that happening. I'm also, my heart is also just aware of the pain and suffering that is in our economy,
Mhm.
right? And I'm really praying that we can accept the history of our economy and where the money comes from. I mean, part of, I wrote earlier this week on the topic of how the fact that all of the wealth held by the United States culture and European culture is stolen wealth. It's all stolen wealth. And historically, if you look at it, the only reason that the 13 U.S. colonies, British colonies, that were able to separate from Britain and were able to fund a growing uh, empire based on military expansion is the fact that land and resources were stolen from the indigenous peoples of North America, and labor was stolen from African peoples, stolen from their lands and brought to to this continent as slaves, as chattel slaves. And without those two things, um, the colonies would not have had the resources to break free of the British Empire, and they wouldn't have had the resources to expand across the continent. And they wouldn't have had the resources to then go on and dominate so much of the globe. And um, and that's the history. That's the reality of it. It's been proven and shown. And so when we talk about um, a restorative economy, when we talk about restorative justice, like we have to take that into account. And there's not any easy solutions. There aren't even any hard solutions. There are only like really hard solutions, because what do you do? What do you do with that? What do we do with that? I mean, I'm a I'm a white man in this culture, who is a direct beneficiary of that stolen wealth, and my ancestors are Jewish and fled pogroms in Eastern Europe and genocide, and and I still benefit. And I said, like, how does all this, how do we work all this out? I have no answers to that. But what I do know is that before we can find answers, we have to face the reality of what it is that we're sitting with and what we are doing. And we need to acknowledge that and witness that. Goes back to the first topic we were talking about. We have to witness the history and the full picture of what this economy is before we can start to transform it. And I want to say, I don't want to relieve any of the pain or grief that comes up when I mention this, and I also don't want us to be overwhelmed by it. There is room to be happy and to celebrate at the same time that there's room for the grief. There's room for inspiration and good works. Like, we can't let it paralyze us. I enjoy my life as much as anybody, but it's just part of the picture. And yeah.
You just touched on something really very, very important. And I see this a lot in the compassionate communities, in the healing communities, in communities of people who are trying to live from their heart and be care and compassion based. And the challenge I think that we face is in this place of acknowledging what is, because it's so painful, right? That people, I mean, I hear this all the time. Look, Lisa, there's nothing I can do about any of this stuff now. So why do I need to pay attention to the news? Why do I need, why? Because I'm doing my life, I'm living my life with care and compassion. Why do I need to feel this pain when it just makes me feel like crap? And I think you just touched on it, and it raises questions like, okay, that place of suppressing versus seeing what is. And if we see what is, as we talked about before this call, I've always been, and most people I know who are trying to heal as individuals and help our worlds heal, have always said, let's be transparent. And in the name of transparency, we have all of this increase of violence and hatred that is surfaced. And the gift of that is it could be a societal healing crisis, giving us a time to transform and take a care-based action with discernment. But it's a challenge. And so I do.
Well, and I just want to speak to that one thing that you were saying, and I this too, but it's so important, I feel, to be careful with our language around this in particular, is that we call it a healing crisis, and there is an increase in visible violence, violence that's visible to white people, um, and violence happening to white people that are caught up in this, but there is not necessarily an increase in actual violence as people of color and as women have experienced for hundreds of years. Is there any more violence than there was in the 70s or the 60s or the 1980s or the 1990s or the 1930s or the 1880s or it's like there's been, if you read a book like The Indigenous History of the United States, and you read through that page by page by page from the very beginnings of this country, you just see genocide after genocide after genocide after genocidal act. And it's the same with the African people's experience on this continent. And I just really want to acknowledge it, because I think it's a place of privilege that we as white people have been ignorant of.
Mhm.
Like, we've been able to not look if we don't want to look.
Right.
And it ain't new. It's not new. And I don't, it's like, I don't, anyway, in service of intersectional understanding of what we're working with, I had to
I
speak.
think that's an excellent point. And I, in with my friends of color, we have this conversation on a regular basis. Thank you for bringing it up, because it's not new. It's the new is that white people are having to pay attention, you know, and that's a good thing. It's a painful thing, but hello, this is also how we can help get more unified in a way as far as compassion globally, um,
Mhm.
recognizing what is. Um, you mentioned something, and I want to kind of go back to it for a second about businesses and how much good is being done here. And again, keeping it in alignment with today's topic, specifically around predatory economy and loving money, both loving money and the love in money. Um, and I'm not trying to. I was going to say whitewash. How appropriate. Uh, I'm not trying to diminish or shove under the carpet any of the conversations about pain at all, but I would like to shift a little bit to talk about some of your work, because it is not, and I'm not saying this as like trying to be promotional or anything like that, but just because you really see a broad spectrum of how many people are doing good in the world and caring and really trying to embrace all of these things in a positive way. And I'm what do you see? What do you experience? I mean, that's a very large general question, but
Well, I see so many people, hundreds, thousands of people that are engaged in various kinds of healing work, right? And that healing work can be as direct as like spiritual healing work, doing this work inside ourselves to wake up and dismantle the ways that the ego holds us in control. It can be more externally focused as like holistic practitioners and medical uh, holistic alternative medical folks who are providing a different way to deal with our physical health from the, pharmaceutical Western medicine structure. There's good in Western medicine, but it ain't the whole picture, not by a long shot. To people who are bringing a heart-based awareness to things like bookkeeping and accounting or architecture or college admissions or education. We're involved in homeschooling our kids through self-directed education. I listen to podcasts by Akila Richards, the Fair of the Free Child, who talks about how to bring self-directed education and raise kids in a way that allows them to follow, have sovereignty over their learning process and to care for their creativity and spark. Um, Jessica Reagan Saltzman of Heart-Based Bookkeeping, who does amazing work with bringing heart-based compassionate work to like actually like tracking your money in business. There's there's the Awarepreneurs community that Paul Zelizer founded, that's on Facebook, as well as doing other things, that has bringing an incredible consciousness and awareness of both social justice issues and consciousness and spirituality to the business realm. I see this happening on a larger and larger and larger scale. When I first started doing this work, one, I wasn't nearly as evolved in my own thinking around social justice issues, even though I'd been involved in activism for years. But since Heart of Business started in 2001, over these past 16 years, 17 years, I've been doing this work of integrating spirituality and business. There was hardly anybody doing that work back then, and now there's a lot of people doing it, and it's being done at all different levels, some of it in more shallow kind of beginning ways and some in more depth ways. And I'm just inspired by so many people that whose hearts are really um, digging in and making a living. Desiree Adaway and Erica Hines, who are doing incredible work around social justice and anti-racist work. They're heroes of mine, and they're making a living doing this work, not just like donating their time to the cause. I mean, I don't know their personal financial situation, but I know they have a business around it, and like support them. Like they're awesome. It's amazing. And so, I just I see this more and more and more and more kind of just sprouting up, and I take inspiration from that.
Yeah, it's exciting. And it is, I think, too, when people were able to surround ourselves with more and more communities of it, not being ignorant and not, staying in touch with what's happening in the world, but also working together with more and more people who are like-minded, to help us shift to love. Um, so I know you have an upcoming course that's a pay from the heart course. Which remind me which class it is again.
It's called The Heart of Your Business.
Your business, right?
Yeah.
And so, in that course, I know I took it a while ago and learned quite a lot from it, and I'm just wanted to frame that because my next question is if you could give people this is probably not a very unfair question, but if you could give people like one or two sort of suggestions, ideas for building their business from a marketing perspective that want to stay in their heart and in integrity, what would that be?
Yeah. So one of my problems as a business teacher is that I know that there are a number of things that are needed over time, and so I want to download like a year's worth of training into like a 5-minute segment, and it's just not possible. So let me name a couple of things that I think are really, really critical, and and I love getting into the nitty gritty of like how do you actually get things done. And before you can get to that, because people want to go into the tactics like, oh, I need a blog, or I need to create a podcast, or I need to create a Facebook group, or I need to start speaking, or, there's all these tactics. There's a few different things. One is that you need to have a healthy relationship in your heart to business and to your own business. It's going to be dysfunctional. The economy is dysfunctional, but that doesn't mean your relationship to your business and being in business is dysfunctional. You can make that healthy. The second thing is that you need to have a big picture of understanding how businesses develop. We have this understanding of the 4 stages of micro business development. When you're self-employed, you have a very small business. There's 4 very distinct stages that businesses go through. On our website, we have a free readiness assessment that walks you through that so you can understand what stage you're in and what's needed at each stage so you don't get distracted and work on the wrong thing. I see people dive into like very advanced tactics that are for later in the 2nd stage or the 3rd stage. And it's like, oh my goodness, you're going to go broke doing that because you're just not ready. Like, focus on the basic things. Let's start to walk before we start to learn to, walk a tightrope. Like, let's learn like, it's going to be so much more satisfying and effective and easier and less overwhelming to do that. And then the final thing is like, take the long game. So many people talk about, have unrealistic expectations. Our culture has unrealistic expectations of how quickly this can happen. Oh yeah, you can like get to 6 figures in 6 months or in 3 months or in 6 weeks or whatever people are talking about. Building a business takes time. It takes time to learn, it takes time to integrate, it takes time to implement, it takes time for it to evolve and for you to learn. It takes time to build relationships. We've seen that for people to move from startup into what we call momentum, where the business is really sustaining itself in a very predictable and dependable way, um, and it can take up to 3 years of focus on business development, not just being open for 3 years, but focus on business development. And this doesn't mean you're at 0, 0, 0, 0, and then in 3 years you finally make a living. It goes up over time and you do better and better and better, but it just takes time. And if you compassionately give yourself that time, then you won't beat up on yourself and think something is wrong. My 8-year-old twin boys, soon to be 9, would love to drive our car if they could, and they're not getting the keys. They are not getting the keys. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, and there's nothing wrong. Like, they're not broken for not being able to drive yet. And it's just where they are in their physical development and their ability to judge and thankfully and discern and make judgments and think clearly, and as well as not being tall enough to see. And so the and thankfully businesses grow up a lot faster than humans do. So don't judge yourself. Give yourself the space. So that's
So
what I want to say.
that's awesome. So we have a question that's just come in, and it's from Susan DeGaia, and she says, many times I hear connections being made between the political or social justice issues and finances when people comment on how compassion is missing in politics, even by those who claim to be Christian. That your when you say that the economy is based on predation and the specifics that you discussed around American history, it's very refreshing for her. And she says, I think this failure is linked to the predatory economy that has infiltrated American politics. Is that your take as well?
If I understand the question correctly, yes, except I would take out the word infiltrated and saying it was there from the beginning. I think it's kind of baked in, because, the very origins of politics in America, in the US is that, one man, one vote was specifically one man, one vote. And we met one white man, one vote. And even more than that, we met one white man who owned land, one white landowner, male landowner, one vote. Because when they actually did the voting on whether to separate from Britain, the majority of the people didn't want to separate. It was the white landed landowners, landed landowners anyway. You get what I'm trying to say? Who voted because it would be in their economic interest to be separate and not have to send tax money to Britain. So it's kind of baked in from the beginning, and so there's nothing surprising about what's happening right now.
Right. So we have 2 minutes left to be here, and then we're going to switch over into our after party. And for those of you who are watching live, in the chat conversation, you can see the link to it, and I will also put it up on the screen here as we begin to wind down this conversation. One second. Mark, is there anything that you would like to say in closing?
I'm just deeply grateful to be able to talk about these topics, and that I will say that as much as we've talked about the larger economy, I love the work that we do. And, if you're trying to build a business in this economy, don't just go on intuition, learn. Of course, we love what we do. And if you want to learn with us, we're here. But if you want to just find someone that you trust, whose values you trust, whose approach you resonate with, who has integrity, and let yourself learn so that your business can grow and thrive in a healthy way without betraying yourself.
That's some good wise words. We have like maybe a minute left, and you just inspired me with one more thing, which is one of the greatest things also that I've learned from you, is how to listen to the heart of your business. You know, especially if you're a solopreneur, is that the correct term? You have your own business. We like to think I am my business, and so whatever is happening with me is happening with our business. And the first time I ever heard you do this guided meditation about feeling the heart of your business, I was like, oh my gosh, it's not, I mean, I've always felt that it's in me and I have to birth it rather than maybe it's its own separate entity out there. And my job is to listen to it and give it what it needs. And so that was a super helpful tip. Do you hear me okay? I have somebody outside my closed window doing a lot of leaf blowing. So I hope you can hear me.
I hear it a little bit, but your sound is still
Okay,
good. I'm hearing your voice clearly.
awesome. You know, and so I want to thank you for that. And we have like maybe 30 seconds left. Maybe this is a conversation more for the after party, but so I just want to thank you for that little piece of wisdom, because that was really helpful in growing a business. It's like, oh, it's there, I'm here, and we do a dance together. So
I mean,
yeah.
beautiful.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. And for everyone who's watching, this is the last of our August theme of a predatory economy. We're next going into September, where we will be talking about, based on the International Day of Peace, how do we build a world of dignity, care, and respect? We've got some great guests, not of whom are all up on the website yet, but will be shortly. And we look forward to seeing you all then. And everyone else who's here, we'll see you in the after party. Thanks. Bye.
I'll be there in a minute.
Great. Bye-bye.